Here is a brief summary of the wise words spoken by Jesus in Urmia during a lecture on the subject of political sovereignty. The literal lecture Jesus gave on political sovereignty has become too complex to capture in a contemporary worldview. This is because of the political evolution of the past 2,000 years. Now countries are organized in a national context. In the time of Jesus, there were only two great world powers, the Roman Empire in the west and the Han Empire in the east, and these were far apart, separated by high mountain ranges and the equally powerful kingdom of the Parthians. Today's world is far removed from the essential content of what Jesus taught here in ancient Persia regarding political sovereignty. We have tried to translate the context of his message to the political situation of the 21st century. There will never be an end to wars on earth as long as nations continue to cling to the fallacious notions of unlimited national sovereignty. There are only two levels of relative sovereignty on an inhabited world: the spiritual free will of the individual mortal and the collective sovereignty of humanity as a whole. Everything between the level of individual man and the level of total humanity is relative, that is, transient. Organizations at any level have value only if they increase the prosperity, well-being, and progress of the individual and the whole sum of individuals, of man and humanity. You should always keep in mind that the spiritual sovereignty of God overrides all intermediate and mediating spiritual allegiances. Someday civil rulers will come to realize that spiritual powers rule in the kingdoms of men. However, the government of God's Spirit within the kingdoms of men is not there for the special benefit of a specially favored group of mortals. There is no such thing as a chosen people. The government of the Most Highs, those who hold the supreme oversight of political evolution, is a reign whose purpose is to bring the greatest good to the greatest number of all people and for the greatest span of time. Sovereignty is power, and it grows through organization. If an organization grows, then its political power increases. This can go well because it can influence larger and larger segments. But this same growth of political organizations also causes a problem at every intermediate level. Political sovereignty usually arose from the hierarchy of the family, developing through organization as when families joined together. Thus clans arose through blood relations. When clans in turn united for various reasons, then tribes came into existence. Tribes are already political groupings based on more than blood relations. Then, through trade, geography, movement, and conquest, tribes are united into nations. Sometimes nations are united into an empire. When sovereignty passes from smaller groups to larger ones, fewer wars arise. That is, fewer small wars arise between smaller nations, but the potential for large wars increases as the nations exercising sovereignty grow larger and larger. In time, when the entire world has been explored and taken possession of, when only a few, yet strong and powerful nations remain. When these large and supposedly sovereign nations begin to border each other, when they are separated only by oceans, then the stage will be set for great wars, global conflicts. So-called sovereign nations cannot operate at too short a distance from each other without creating conflicts and starting wars. The difficulty in the evolution of political sovereignty from the family to a government, encompassing all of humanity, lies in the inertial resistance that appears at all intermediate levels. Families have on occasion defied their clan, while clans and tribes have often sought to undermine the sovereignty of the territorial state. Any new progressive development of political sovereignty is hampered and hindered by the scaffolding stages of previous developments in political organization. This is simply a fact because human loyalties are difficult to change once they are established. The same loyalties that enable the evolution of the tribe complicate the evolution of the supertribe, the territorial state. And the same loyalties that make possible the evolution of the territorial state give enormous complications in the evolutionary development of the government of all mankind. Political sovereignty is created from the surrender of the right to self-determination, first by the individual within the family, and then by the families and clans in their relation to the tribe. This progressive transfer of the right of self-determination from smaller to larger and larger political organizations, generally speaking, has continued unabated in the East since the establishment of the Ming and Mughal dynasties. In the West, this development also took place for more than 1,000 years, until World War I, when, unhappily, a backward movement temporarily thwarted the normal direction of evolution. As the suppressed sovereignty of small groups in Europe regained their right to self-determination, it fueled nationalism. The world will have no lasting peace until the supposedly sovereign nations fully surrender their sovereign power to the brotherhood of men, the government of mankind. Through internationalism, such as the United Nations, for example, humanity will never achieve lasting peace. Global confederations of nations will effectively prevent small wars and acceptably restrain small nations, but they will not prevent world wars or restrain the 3, 4, or 5 most powerful governments. During a real conflict, one of these world powers will withdraw from the covenant and declare war. Nations cannot be prevented from starting wars as long as they remain infected with the deceptive virus of national sovereignty. Internationalism is a step in the right direction. An international peacekeeping force will prevent many small wars but will not be effective in preventing major wars, such as conflicts between the major military governments on Earth. As the number of truly sovereign nations or superpowers decreases, then there arises an opportunity, and probably the need, for a world government. When only a few truly sovereign superpowers exist, then these must either maintain their national hegemony by war and force, or by voluntarily renouncing certain prerogatives of sovereignty, they will have to form a new essential core of a supranational power, which will serve as the beginning of true sovereignty for all humanity. There will be no peace on earth until every supposedly sovereign nation relinquishes its power to start a war. Political sovereignty is an innate desire of all nations. When all nations come together to form a world government, then they have the right and power to make such a government sovereign. And when such a representative or democratic world power is in command of the land, air, and sea powers of the world, then there can be peace on earth and benevolence among men, but not before. As an example, one need only look at the 50 states of the American Federal Union. They have been living in peace for a long time. They no longer wage war among themselves. They have transferred their sovereignty to the federal government. After the Civil War, which brought about a decision in this one, they have dropped all claims to the delusion of self-determination. While each state regulates its own internal affairs, such a state no longer has to deal with foreign relations, import and export duties, immigration, military affairs, or interstate trade and commerce. Nor do individual states have to deal with matters of citizenship anymore. The 50 states of America do not have to fear the ravages of war as long as the sovereignty of the federal government is not compromised in any way. These 50 states that have given up the twin fallacies of sovereignty and the right of self-determination can rejoice in peace and tranquility among themselves. Likewise, the nations of the earth will begin to know peace when they voluntarily surrender their respective sovereignty to a world government, a government of sovereignty for the brotherhood of men. In this world state, the small nations will be as powerful as the large ones, just as the small American state Hawaii has as many senators in the U.S. Congress as, for example, the much larger state of New York. The limited state sovereignty of these American states was created by people and for the people. The transcendent national sovereignty of the American Federal Union was created by the 13 original states for their own benefit and for the people. One day a planetary government will accordingly be formed by nations for their own benefit and for the benefit of all people. Citizens are not born for the benefit of governments. Governments are organizations created and designed for the benefit of people. The evolution of political sovereignty reaches its endpoint only when the government of the sovereignty of all people makes its appearance. All other forms of sovereignty are relative in value, have meaning only as intermediate forms, and are only of subordinate status. With the progress of natural science, wars are going to cause ever greater devastation until they almost end in the suicide of nations. How many more wars must be fought and how many more unions of nations must fail before men will be willing to establish the government of mankind and enjoy the blessings of permanent peace and the well-being that comes with the calm of benevolence, a worldwide benevolence, among men?